As we look back at the Singtel Singapore Grand Prix, the night race in the Jewel of the Orient, we speak to Otmar Szafnauer, the CEO of Sahara Force India, about that brilliant drive to fourth place by Paul de Resta. We talk about strategy, we talk about the other Sahara Force India driver, Nico Hulkenberg, and many more things besides. It was a great day for Sebastian Vettel and Red Bull Racing, and also for Renault, winning for the first time with Sebastian since the Bahrain Grand Prix. On that note, we speak to Remy Taffin, the head of track operations for Renault F1, talking about the recent spate of alternator problems on the Renault engine and how that all came right on the night in Singapore, and about the upcoming races and the engine cycle facing Renault and, of course, the other engine manufacturers as we go into this very tight phase of the 2012 Formula One World Championship. Finally, we're joined by Luis Razia, the runner-up in the GP2 Championship this year. Of course, there was a GP2 race at Singapore. We talk about the conditions in which the GP2 drivers performed in that Jewel of the Orient. And we talk about Luis's plans for the winter, based on having already tested the Sahara Force India car in Manicourt, his plans for further testing and indeed for racing in Formula One in 2013. That's episode 84 of The Flying Lap.
Smibs TV. Webcasts for people with a passion. Live connectivity for the Flying Lap is provided by ThinkTel. Switch without interruption to a cost-effective IP-based telephone service at thinktel.net. Hosting for the Flying Lap is brought to you by Webcore Labs. Host your own website at webcorelabs.com.
Episode 84 of The Flying Lap, September 26, 2012, Singtel Singapore Grand Prix debrief. Hello F1 fans around the world, welcome to episode 84 of The Flying Lap. Back in the London studio now after our week in Singapore. Thanks for everybody bearing with me in that Singapore live show. And apologies if it looked a bit scratchy at some point. I've got to tell you, I'd just gone straight from the track and sweaty, dirty, everything was messy. But anyway, I'm glad it worked out technically, and a big thanks again to Craig Scarborough and to Anthony Rollinson for joining me there in Singapore. Big thanks to our technical partners, to ThinkTel and to Webcore Labs, and to Globe International in Melbourne, Australia, our commercial sponsors. A reminder now that on this show you can join us by going live to http, just basically smibs.tv/live, and post your questions and comments. Lots to talk about as we look back at the Singtel Singapore Grand Prix. I've actually posted a couple of videos on my website of what the place looked like on the Monday after the race. That's me just wanting the weekend to go on, really, and just saying, oh, I wish I didn't have to go back home. Well, I love going home, but it was a great moment just to go back on Monday and have a look at Singapore under the hot sun rather than those amazing Maoli lights. Right, let's get right down to it and talk about the racing that we saw in Singapore and what moments stick in the memory. For me, Lewis Hamilton's pole lap was just stunning, brilliantly put together. The annoying thing, actually, and this begs to a question that we do get asked quite often about what can be done to make more cars go out in Q3. The annoying thing is that I don't think many television viewers actually got to see Lewis's lap, because as far as I could see, the world feed actually focused on Jenson in Q3. Not a bad call, but to my mind, Lewis was always going to be able to get a little bit more out of the McLaren, particularly as Jenson wasn't that comfortable with the back end and the feel of the back end of the car and the instability at the rear. So we didn't get to see much of Lewis's lap. By the time they got to him, he was basically hard on the throttle and just going through the last two corners. But what a lap that was, and I think that showed pretty well where Lewis is very different in style from Jenson. Jenson spoke most of the weekend about an unstable rear on the McLaren, as I say, and didn't feel that confident with it. But at those moments when the initial brake application is applied, and equally if the back end starts to get a little bit wayward as they turn into the corner, Lewis has that amazing ability just to be able to adapt what he's doing, usually through footwork, not visible through handwork, but through footwork and just balancing the car, coming out of the throttle slightly, maybe coming out of the brake pedal pressure a little bit more at a faster rate, just to get the car to stick and to do what he wants it to do. And we saw that in so many different corners in Singapore. It was just a joy to watch. And so for me, this going back to that other point about what can be done about more cars in Q3, the reality is Q3 is so short that if you blink, you miss it. And if the TV director is on the wrong car, we miss the pole lap. So in reality, I'm not actually that worried about the cars that don't go out. In fact, the fewer cars out there to enable us to focus on the guys who really are going for the pole, the better in some ways, because I want to see that pole lap. And I think most of the F1 fans around the world do too. Yes, I can watch it the next day or on a replay. I can watch it from the onboard, but it's not the same. As I've said many times, from an onboard, you get a completely different perspective, a good, interesting perspective, but you don't see much about the footwork, really. You don't really see what the car's doing relative to the approach to the corner, which is always an important thing. So Lewis's pole lap for me was one of the outstanding moments of the Singapore Grand Prix. And I love, too, his start. Just did it right. There's a lot of build-up to that Grand Prix. It's an unusual start time. It's hot, it's sticky. The drivers have been around for a long time in the paddock area. On this occasion, we had the very nice tribute, actually beautifully handled, I thought, by Bob Constanduris to Sid Watkins, and then the national anthem. Great to see the drivers out of the cars acknowledging the national anthem because they were out for Sid as well. So all that was going on, and it was a difficult grid, actually, I thought, because the drivers had kind of gone back to the garage when they got out of the cars after the formation lap. They went back, and I walked down the pit lane, and you look into Mercedes, and there's Michael and Nico doing what appeared to be a sort of standard debrief after an FP3, just sitting there with the engineers looking at data. And then they went back to the grid again. They stood for the anthem for Sid's farewell, and then they all rushed back into the pit lane again for final bathroom break time, because this was going to be a long, hot 2-hour race. So it was a frenetic grid. Easy for things to go wrong, but they didn't. I thought Lewis did a really good job off the line. And the other thing was Pastor Maldonado. Everybody waiting for Pastor to make another mistake. Of course, his sort of comeback race, if you like, was the Italian Grand Prix, and nobody really watched him there because he was right at the back of the grid. As it happened, I was exactly opposite him off the line at Monza, and he made, guess what, a perfect start. And he did again in Singapore. But this is where some of these disciplinary measures actually pay off. And I think this is where Romain Grosjean probably will be the better driver for having to miss the Italian Grand Prix and that very harsh penalty that he had to live with. When Pastor turned into that first corner, he got understeer in the Williams. And that's always one of the bugbears of that car, trying to get the front tires hot as soon as possible. And he ran a little bit wide, and he just did a great job. Sebastian Vettel came down the inside. There was a bit of argy-bargy. Nobody got touched. Everybody accelerated away. Yeah, he lost 2 or 3 places. It was disappointing. But the Grand Prix was on, and then he drove exceptionally well. We'll get onto that in a minute. But that I thought also was a nice bit of driving. And then lap 15, after his pit stop, he was behind on the road Nico Hülkenberg in the Force India, ahead of Fernando, who was in a little bit of traffic himself. But it was very important that Pastor regain a little bit of ground that he had lost in the pit stop, just a little bit. Very good pit work by Ferrari, not bad by Williams. And we had that amazing moment when he came out of turn 3 and approached, turn 4, and going into the kink of turn 5, he was going to pass Nico Rosberg on the outside, but Nico didn't move, so he just flicked the steering and went down the inside, and the back end came loose on the FW34 in 7th gear. If it wasn't 7th, it was peak revs in 6th. And that was just phenomenal car control, I thought. It just brought tears to my eyes, not of appreciation. It was, whoa, that was a jolt to see that. And that was one of the highlights for me. And then there were all those accidents. Well, before we get on to the accidents, Felipe Massa and Bruno Senna, what was that all about? Again, on the onboard, kind of difficult to see what was going on. But Felipe adamant that he was kind of where he should be, and Bruno moved over on him. It was spooky to watch. That really was spooky to watch, no question about it. And then we got on to Michael Schumacher and what was happening there. Now, Louise Goodman, my co-presenter from the pit lane for GPTV in Singapore, got to Michael during the race. And Michael was extraordinary. He said something along the lines of, I just don't understand it. I braked sooner than I would normally there because I could see there was a lot of traffic. And for some reason, the brakes came on harder than they should have. And I don't understand what happened. That's basically what he said. It sounds really strange to me. And because he's Michael, because he's a 7 times world champion, we will give him the benefit of the doubt in the sense that the team are still looking at what was the cause of a brake problem there. But got to say, it looked like another Michael mistake. And I say another because he did virtually the same thing with Bruno Senna in Barcelona this year, round at the back of Bruno. To do it once is a mistake. To do it twice is very, very worrying. And if you throw in on top of that, what I keep going on about, that business of going into the pit lane from the outside of the track at Spa in front of another car, it's not for nothing that people like Darren Heath, F1 photographer, are writing blogs now saying, come on, Michael, it's time to hang your helmet up, and or other people saying, go and get an eyesight test or whatever. My only final thought on Michael Schumacher was, it's sad that at the moment so many people are being so critical, and he either needs to make a decision to stop or needs to change things around. It'll be interesting to see where he goes in his mind. Romain Grosjean, a lot of people criticized my comments on Twitter that I thought Romain did a spectacular job, particularly his car control and his reflexes in qualifying. And the people who criticized me are basically correct, because had Romain not done all that, maybe he could have got a little bit more out of the car. Maybe he could have qualified, 6th or 7th, maybe even 5th. But look from where Romain was coming from. He was coming from having missed the Italian Grand Prix. The car was disappointing for both Romain and for Kimi on Friday. Some of the updates didn't provide the speed that Lotus F1 were expecting. The team were a bit lost on Friday night. And in that situation, it was very easy, I think, for Romain there to take the soft option and kind of underdrive the car and let Kimi sort of see where they were going and how much grip the car had. But he took the opposite choice. He actually went for it and overdrove the car. He didn't hit anything. And he just showed, Romain Grosjean's back. Well, he did to me anyway. Some great slides, unbelievable judgment, phenomenal reflexes, and he's a brave boy too. And I was very impressed with that. He drove well in the race too. Kept his nose clean. Kimi did a very good job too. The car wasn't that good. Disappointing, I think. That was probably the most disappointing aspect of the Singapore Grand Prix, the performance of the Lotus F1s. But no doubt they will be back. Right, one of the drives of the race, in my view, belonged to Paul di Resta, who finished 4th for Sahara Force India. His best personal finish, and another very, very strong performance from this team, which maybe has a very good car, maybe has a mediocre car, but with 2 outstandingly quick drivers in there, it's kind of difficult to judge how good or bad the car is. It's an irony, because sometimes you have a great car, but you wonder, wow, if we had this driver in or that driver in, where would we be? So, very impressed with Paul di Resta's drive. And on that note, I spoke a little bit earlier today with Otmar Szafnauer, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Sahara Force India. Now, I've known Otmar for several years, and back in the Honda days, in the Reynard days, actually, back in America. But here he is now, a big wheel at Sahara Force India, and this is how the conversation went.
Well, Otmar, congratulations to you and to everybody at Sahara Force India. What a great result for Paul di Resta, P4 there. And you can look at that any number of ways. He was pushing Fernando very hard in the closing stages. Fernando just a little bit quicker perhaps, but comprehensively outraced and outperformed Nico Rosberg in the quicker of the 2 Mercedes in terms of lap time, identical strategies, and he just had him throughout the race. A great night for you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm glad somebody recognized it. Yeah, I thought our performance was pretty good.
The interesting thing, was the strategy. I just mentioned that you and Nico in the Mercedes, identical strategies. Tell me a little bit about that, because the Super Soft was definitely a tyre that some teams considered. We saw Red Bull put Mark Webber onto the Super Soft. It was probably a mistake, easy to say that in hindsight. And I noticed you ran the Super Soft, of course, on Nico Hülkenberg. What was the thinking on that tyre going into the race?
Well, we were going into the race. It was about a second or just over a second a lap quicker in qualifying. And Paul, when he got into Q3, we had a decision to make, similar to Mercedes, whether we stuck him on the Super Soft to gain position at the start of the race, to gain grid position, or not. And I think some of the teams, I could be wrong, struggled with 2 or 3 stops, and maybe Mercedes were one of them, thinking that if they had fresh tires all along and ran the Super Softs only once, they could two-stop it. But I think we were comfortable in knowing that we could two-stop it even if we ran the super softs in qualifying, put an extra few laps on them, and started on them, we could still two-stop it.
Right.
So that was the reason for running the super softs in Q3 was just to get grid position, but we were comfortable in knowing that we could still two-stop it.
Right, gotcha. If I can just clear up one anomaly that appears in the stats. Pirelli have got Nico starting on a new set of softs, obviously, but then they have him going to another new set of softs on lap 18, and then the last two stints on super soft. And yet, in the official Sahara Force India press release, it actually has Nico going to super softs in his first stop, contrary to the Pirelli thing. Can you just clarify what Nico's tyre strategy actually was in the race?
Nico went soft, super soft.
Right. Okay.
If you remember, the thing that caught us out with Nico was during the safety car, we still had to run the super softs because we hadn't run them yet.
Yeah.
So he was on soft then. So he went soft, super soft.
Yeah.
So had we brought him in during that safety car, he would have had to do 20 plus laps on a set of super softs or pit again.
Yeah.
Move to a 3-stop instead of a 2-stop. And that's why we didn't bring him in.
Right, okay.
We didn't think the super softs would last 20. Well, we didn't know how long the safety car was going to be out there because we had to make the decision instantly. And we didn't think that the super softs were going to last 25 laps, so we decided to keep them out.
No. I mean, in terms of using the super soft well, it looks like Massa did a very good job.
Did a good job.
Yeah, with a 3-stop strategy, 2 sets of soft and then super soft in the last stint. But then you got to say, Nico set the fastest lap on his super softs right at the end as well.
Well, Massa, how many laps did he on those super softs did he do under the safety car?
Yeah.
That'd be 6 or 7.
Yeah.
And the race was cut short by 2 laps. So all those things played into Massa's favor because Massa and Nico would have been on the same strategy exactly had we brought Nico in under the safety car and put super softs on. And had we done that, when the safety car happened, Nico was 30 seconds ahead of Massa.
Right.
And had we done that with Nico, he probably would have finished 5th or 6th.
Very easy to say in hindsight.
Easy to say, but you can't predict the second safety car.
No, of course you can't. Let's go back to Paul for a second and again just look at that result. Mercedes, we know, had the new exhaust system on those cars, on the factory Mercedes, and they appeared to pick up grip. They got both cars into Q3. And yet, there's Force India again, under the radar, if you like. Just superb job. And in terms of your chassis versus the Mercedes chassis, you still got. I mean, what's your feeling now about how the two cars compare?
Well, I think Mercedes, like you say, they've moved to a different exhaust system to improve grip under acceleration, but they still have the other exhaust system where they were strong in some other races. We've put all of our eggs in one basket, so there are certain circuits which we're going to be stronger at than others. And I think Mercedes, I don't know what they will do, but perhaps come Suzuka or Brazil or maybe even India, where you've got that long straight with their double DRS and the other exhaust system. Maybe they'll now be able to switch exhaust systems from one race to the next, and they'll be strong everywhere. It wasn't long ago they won the race in China and beat everybody by 18 seconds or something.
I know, it's just been an amazing year in that sense.
Unbelievable.
We look back at the things that have happened. I mean, on that basis, and I'm not being supercilious here, but on that basis, you guys have still got to be thinking you got half a chance of winning a Grand Prix before the end of the year.
Yeah, I mean, this one here, too, everybody can look back and have some what-ifs. But it was late in the race that safety car happened. And Karthikeyan, I think he just drove into the barrier. I didn't see anything break or anything. I don't know what he did. Mm-hmm. But I have it on from a reliable source that Alonso was 3-stopping that race. But had the safety car not happened, he would have been in again. And I also hear that Button, they weren't sure whether he could do a two-stop or not. They were considering bringing him in. If that would have happened, Paul, I can assure you, was two-stopping that race.
Wow.
And we would have been on the podium. But it didn't happen. You know, we had the safety car, it bunched everybody up. They had a chance to pit under the safety car. And I think more importantly, again, the race was cut short by 2 laps, and we had, I can't remember how many laps under the safety car, but it had to be around 7 or 8.
Yeah, it was at least another 4, 5, 8 it looks like, yeah. Just looking at Paul's lap times when he was behind Alonso in that last phase after the safety car came in, 2 laps stand out, Otmar, laps 51 and 52, which he did within a thousandth of a second of one another. The consistency, actually there's 3 effectively if you want to throw those in. The consistency of the guy is just outstanding.
No, he's very good. He's very good. I think he has stepped up to the Challenger Formula One very well. You know, this is his second year now, so he knows the circuit's a bit better. He's not learning from that regard, so he can spend more of his capacity on other things, car setup, and he does a good job.
He does indeed. And I just wonder now, just talking left field a little bit, how he is in his head right now, because since the Michael accident in Singapore, there has to be more thought now that perhaps Michael isn't going to be racing next year. And if that's the case, Paul will come right into the frame, I would imagine. Potentially the staying where he is, obviously, but then equally he's got to have chances at Mercedes and McLaren. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, we obviously want to keep Paul for all the reasons we just mentioned. He's a very good racer. You know, he's contractually obligated to us. However, having said that, you know, the shareholders usually don't step in the way of somebody wanting to progress or do something else. So, but I guess we would have to cross that bridge when we came to it.
Yeah. Interesting, I think. Well, not interesting. It was noteworthy, the number of mechanical retirements in this race. And indeed, if you go back to Monza, I guess, the attrition rate has gone up markedly in the last 2 races. Your thoughts on that? Is it just the length of the season? Is it the flyaways starting to loom in everybody's mind? And beyond that, that gearbox problem of Lewis Hamilton's, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but basically you use the same gearbox, I believe.
We do. We use the same gearbox, so hopefully they will get to the root cause and fix it, because you know that could be an issue for us.
Any news on that?
Not yet. We haven't had our. We have a meeting after every Grand Prix to go through the faults and the root cause fixes. But we usually do that midweek such that people can have a bit of a chance to investigate. And we haven't had that meeting, so I don't know the answer to that. But hopefully that that'll get fixed for us. And I mean I don't know why that's happening. I know we had a failure on Nico's car in qualifying, not in the race, and that was just an oversight here. Nothing to do with the race season being any longer. But for the rest of the teams, you know, it's hard to know. I can't speak about their failures and why they're happening.
What was that problem actually you had on Nico's car, Otmar?
We had a fuel system issue.
Okay. Well, I wonder if that ties in with
a hose in the fuel system break.
Right. Okay. So it bears no relation to the Jenson Button problem in Monza.
No, it's totally different.
Good. Well, here we now go to Japan, and as you say, it'll be interesting to see how Mercedes do perform. But from your point of view, the policy again, and we've talked about this before, Otmar, on the Flying Lap, the policy of the team selecting the 2 best drivers you can within reason, really paying off, because your 2 guys are just delivering race after race after race now.
Yeah, you know, it's always a trade-off, but I do think if you pick the 2 best drivers you can, it brings with it so many other things, including motivation at the factory and how hard people work, how much the drivers push you, because they want to do well. I mean, it comes with a lot of intangibles. And I like that, quite frankly. And when you're racing, and you know you've got the two best drivers in the car that you can, it's just a different mindset when you go racing. You know, if you don't, then you always question, oh, how good could we be if we had so-and-so in the car?
Yeah.
And that's never a good place to be.
And finally, Otmar, we have also on the show tonight Luis Razzia, who had a very, very good season in GP2 this year. Didn't win the championship, but stood out really with the forcefulness of his driving and his consistency at that level. And I know you had him in the car recently at Magny-Cours. Any thoughts on Luis Razzia?
Did a great job for us. He's very professional. And like you say, he was quick. We had good feedback from him. So we were impressed.
Good. Otmar, I'll let you get on. I know it's a busy time for all you guys, and very best of luck the upcoming race, the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka.
Thanks very much, Peter.
Thanks, Otmar.
Bye.
Thanks to Otmar and to all at Sahara Force India for enabling us to chat post-race. Not an easy time when all the teams are debriefing, and no news as yet, solid news as yet, on the cause of the problem of Lewis's gearbox problem. We did hear that Jensen radioed in to say that there was some oil on the track, and McLaren put two and two together at that point and thought maybe that oil was coming from Lewis's gearbox. Lewis started to lose third gear initially, and then the others later on. So probably some sort of mechanical problem with a barrel or something like that. And if so, obviously an issue for the other, for McLaren for sure, but equally for other teams using that gearbox. So watch this space. As soon as we hear something from McLaren, I'm sure we'll go into more detail. Pastor Maldonado had a hydraulic leak from very early on in the race, and on the pit wall they knew, and this is actually an answer to a question we've had about any more news on the Williams failures. Sorry if I could just find out who that said. Yeah, well, I'll find it in a second, but there was a question about any more news on the Williams retirements. And Williams calculated quite early in the race that there was going to be enough hydraulic pressure and fluid in the car to get him through to about lap 59, lap 60. And maybe if the race was shortened to the 2-hour limit, he would make the distance. So they went for it. But when he came in for his first stop, the leak accelerated, and then they knew that they were going to be struggling to go the whole race distance. So very bad luck for Pastor Maldonado. Bruno Senna, meanwhile, had a KERS failure. Now, that's the first time that I can think of that we've had a major KERS failure on a Williams, particularly in a race. And it was so severe that basically it melted the front of the engine when it failed at the end of the race. And that's why Bruno had quite severe burns, or severe, he had burn marks on his back. It was from the heat from that melting engine. And we're going to talk in just a minute to Remy Taffin, the head of track operations for Renault, about that and other matters to do with Renault Formula One. So a dramatic close to the race for Bruno. A shame, actually, because although he blotted his copybook on Friday and hit the wall and didn't have a great qualifying as a result, he actually drove extremely well in the race and just maximized everything in his disposal. And I thought did a very good job in the race. So a great shame for him that happened. I should point out that Mercedes Grand Prix say that Nico Rosberg incurred some bodywork damage in the first corner incident, fracas, and that car was less than par. So the direct comparison with Force India, perhaps a little bit unfair, but you got to say that Nico did a very good job. The car was competitive, and certainly I don't think in any way detracts from the performance of Paul di Resta and what he did for Sahara Force India. One other small point about Michael Schumacher, in the Mercedes press release, they said after Friday practice at Singapore, quoting Michael, that he lost a bit of time with a brake issue. And I bumped into one of the Brembo guys before the Grand Prix and said, what was the brake issue Michael had? And they said, oh, he didn't have a brake issue at all. We don't know what that's all about. So only mentioned that in the context of the brake problem he had on Sunday. So your guess is as good as mine what's going on there. It's incredible that somebody of Michael's stature wouldn't be looking where he was going and just froze on the brakes at the last minute and ran into the back of Jean-Eric Vergne. Equally, I suppose anything's possible. Right. Now, let's talk a little bit more about not only the Renault problems of late, but also an amazing win for Renault in Singapore, because if any pit wall would have been biting their nails and looking a little bit nervous. And I think we saw that from Adrian Newey in the closing laps. It would have been Red Bull racing Renault, because they've had their fair share of mechanical failures this year, Valencia being a very good example. But in Singapore, the car ran like a clock, and Sebastian Vettel drove beautifully. Apart from that slight glitch when he was following Lewis early in the race and he had to miss the Singapore Sling turn 9, turn 10 chicane, it took the right decision just to go straight on, didn't damage the floor, didn't do anything, got his momentum back pretty quickly. Apart from that, it was glitch-free, and Renault scored a superb victory. Not an easy thing, as we're beginning to discover in Formula One. We were taking victories and engine reliability for granted a few months ago, but now we can see just how difficult it is. So about these subjects and more, I spoke a little bit earlier today to Rémi Taffin, the head of operations, as I say, for Renault Sport F1.
Good. Well, first thing I wanted to say was congratulations to everybody at Red Bull, because I can imagine, and Renault, of course, because I can imagine that it would have been quite a nervous evening in Singapore with all the recent problems we've had, particularly with the alternator. But the car was just bulletproof and did everything it could have been asked from it.
No, definitely. Thank you. And to be fair, I did not really imagine what it could have been differently. So that's the way it was, and it was perfect.
Well, we've seen you in various discussions with Roberto Dalla of Magneti Marelli over the last couple of races, and I just wonder where you're at now with the alternators. I hear that you're working on something new, perhaps for Korea. I don't know if that's the correct information, but and I think it's something to do with bearings, new bearings in the system.
Yeah, it's correct to say that we're now working on a different solution. So we brought one in Singapore, which was the first attempt, and we've got a second one for Korea, for Japan, sorry.
Yeah.
And which should be similar when we get to Korea. And we've got another thing targeted for Abu Dhabi. And the main thing is obviously it's a sensitive part, sorry, and it's difficult to make big changes straight into it. So we are proceeding step by step, and but obviously as quick as we can. And as you quoted, obviously we're working on the environment of the bearing, which we actually want to make it more consistent as a mounting, and that's where we're working at the minute, and that's why we've got different solutions.
It must have been, I don't want to dwell on the problem too much, but looking at it from the perspective, it's actually quite an interesting subject, because everything that goes on in motor racing is interesting, and when we see excellent companies with lots of resources actually battling to solve a problem, it's always an interesting situation. So I hope you don't mind my talking about it a little bit, but it must be frustrating when there appears to be no apparent sequence or logic to the way the alternators were failing. But in itself, I guess that was giving you some sort of answer. It was sort of happening at random, which meant that potentially it was a design fault, I suppose, affected by batch manufacture.
To be fair, at the first problem we get basically in Malaysia, we were just puzzled because we obviously when we got the parts back, they were the main problem was they're all melted. So it's with an alternator, it's a bit difficult, because when everything is burned inside, you could either say, okay, I had a problem mechanically speaking, then in turn everything into a big trouble and everything is melt, or it could be electrical, because you could also melt the alternator from feeding too much current into it. So that was a bit difficult, and even all the parts inside actually were completely burned. So it's very difficult to know anything. And so we, as engineers, we just work and we say, okay, what could be wrong? So we say, how we use it first. So we try to sort out all these parts of the way we operate, just to make sure there is nothing into this. And that's why when we actually got to Monza and we had problems, we were at least definitively sure that we were operating the right condition, right ranges for anything in the alternator, and we could actually concentrate on, let's say, it could be either a design issue or a batch issue or a quality problem. So it's, let's say, step by step, we could get into the situation. And again, as we could not reproduce the problem, let's say on dyno, it's not easy, because eventually you're more or less spending to when I'm going to get the next failure.
Yes.
And then I will learn more. But it's a bit of a closed loop thing on failure. So you learn more because you fail more.
Yeah.
It's a shame, but that was the only way we had at that time to find out.
And I think the interesting thing also is that Formula One's very good at channeling air and using the aerodynamics of the car, and I've no doubt at all that after the first failure you would have been looking at trying to keep the thing as cool as possible. But of course in reality, I suppose, I'm only guessing here, that a lot of the heat problems are probably generated internally, irrelevant to the sort of cooling ducting you're getting onto the alternator anyway.
Yeah, after the battle, we could say what we put in place, and we were obviously we did ask our teams to feed air into the alternator just to try to grab a few degrees, which helped, but could not have solved our problem at that time. It was just part of the items we put on the table, and we say we need to do that, and that, because if anything, it's going to help the situation, but that was not at all. And it's not also a secret that our alternator is all cooled. So it's not because you're going to blow much air onto it that you're going to get the temperature down by 50 degrees or something like this. We're looking at 5 or 10 degrees.
Or conversely, that when the car's running slowly, when Sebastian's running slowly behind the safety car, that in reality that was going to put the alternator in a worse situation.
This has been quoted as a problem for our cars, because mainly we saw that at low revs, where the alternator is not supplying a lot of current due to its characteristic, we saw that the car could draw more current than the alternator is able to feed. So obviously it goes into a sort of a thermal runaway.
Yeah.
But in this occasion, even in Valencia, we could not trace that to this point. But as we had a few spots somewhere that could say, okay, we have made the alternator a bit working out of range at that point, we say, okay, we're going to give us 30% margin. That's the sort of figure you read in the press when we lengthen the alternator, just to make sure that there is nothing on that side. And so any safety car is not actually a big problem, because when you're on the safety car, the temperature of the engine, and particularly the oil, is going down.
Yes.
And it helps the alternator eventually.
Yeah. Remy, I just want to ask you something now that I've heard, but I don't know if you could comment on it, but I've heard that the KERS failure on Bruno Senna's car in Singapore was such that basically the front of the engine was completely melted by the end there. Is that right? I mean, a lot of people say they've never seen anything like it before. It's a fair comment. I mean, it's let's say we tried to get to the end, and unfortunately we get the end of the engine before the end of the race. And it was melted, but it's you know how the engine is drive at the front of the engine. And if for some reason you have an internal failure on one of the many bearings we've got in a row, obviously it's going to solicitate the other part. And let's say in that mounting, the weakest part is at the front of the engine. So if there is any problem in line, that will be the fuse. And if we keep on working and try to get to the end, even if we know we've got a problem, that's where we're gonna suffer more. That's why when we had the car back, we stripped, and we could see that obviously was, let's say, not burned, but you imagine all the energy you have to get out of this. So it's the aluminium is completely brown, and it's not nice to see. Well, I'd like to see a photograph of that. That's because F1 engines look so beautiful normally. It'd be kind of nice to see one in a different state for a change.
Yeah, that was not nice.
No, I can imagine. And that was obviously a KERS issue from the Williams side of things. They have a slightly different KERS system to your other teams, I believe, don't they?
Yeah, they are running their own MGU, and we actually last winter tested everything with us just to make sure that it runs okay on our engine, and we didn't really had any problems, only one over the winter. And they obviously are looking into it. I know Williams is investigating these things, because we're prone to saying that it came from the MGU, but as anything, we never we never say, okay, that's where it has come from. So we have to analyze the engine and the parts.
Yeah.
And Williams is doing the same on their side, but at the minute of saying we are more on the 90-10%.
Right. Okay. Well, thanks so much for that, Remy. And again, just going back to really positive things, just a splendid result from you all round. I mean, obviously the speed of the Red Bull, but also Pastor Maldonado's speed in the Williams Renault must have been very encouraging for you.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I'm very unlucky there with the hydraulic failure. I gather that they saw the leak quite early on in the race, but they worked out that it was potentially going to do 59 of 62 laps or something like that. So they thought they'd keep going, but then when when the pit stop came, the hydraulic leak got a lot worse, which was a shame.
Yeah, and to be fair, it was the same on both cars because we traced also the problem we had on Senna's car 25 laps or 30 laps before the end. So we had both cars running in a state that we know we maybe could not reach the end. So that was not really nice.
Very frustrating.
Especially looking at the performance of the car, but that's the way it is.
Yeah, very frustrating. A very difficult time coming up for you logistically in terms of where the races are, the time frame, and of course the pressure of the championship. How are you placed now in terms of engine lifing and the cycle of the engines for your teams?
To be fair, we are not in the situation we would have liked, let's say, when we started the year with. We may be, if I would say, half an engine or even one engine behind schedule because of the problem we encountered since the beginning of the year. But we did recover a lot through the summer. Mm-hmm. So we're still a bit in, let's say, in a zone that we have to take care of things. We cannot really push everything out. But let's say we are in a situation we can do the last 6 races in a good shape. We just need to ensure we haven't got any more failure, which is normally when we get at that time of the year, you always have a bit of a safety margin you build up since the beginning of the year, which we have already consumed. So we just have to make it right every single race.
Well, based on Singapore, all things looking good, of course, different types of circuits coming up, and we wish you all the very best for those, and congratulations again on a splendid result in Singapore. Really good. Thank you for talking to us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Remy. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you very much.
Of Renault Formula One, telling us that the end of the engine came before the end of the race, very sadly for Bruno Senna, and also telling us that they can't afford too many more problems. They're kind of on the limit in terms of the margin with which they can play in terms of engine lifing. So that's an interesting comment as well, particularly as we have some quite tough engine circuits coming up with some long straightaways, India being a good example, and Circuit of the Americas too. It was Bob Keating who raised the question about the Williams, so thank you very much for that, Bob. A good question from Shane in California. Comment: for my money, the drive that Timo Glock put in was the best of the race. Most other drivers maintained position after accounting for retirements or ended up where they should have been during qualifying. P12 for Marussia is huge on a street circuit that isn't known for its overtaking to boot. Wondering what your thoughts were on Timo's drive and on Timo in general. Also, was the performance from Marussia a fluke? No, I think they're definitely making progress. They're working hard. I mean, everybody's working hard at the moment. Timo is very good around Singapore. We know that. We've seen that. We saw it in the Toyota days. But what really impressed me about Timo this weekend was the drama he had on, I was going to say Saturday morning, but of course it was Saturday evening, FP3, when he had not one but 2 throttle sensors fail within about 20 meters of one another, the result of which was basically a stuck throttle. And that's not pleasant on a circuit like Singapore. And he ground the thing to a halt, locking the brakes, smoke everywhere, and came back and they regrouped. And then he went on and delivered on Sunday with a beautifully paced drive. So, yeah, I was very, very impressed with Timo as well. And what I like about Timo is that he is a bit up and down. There are some circuits he likes and some that he doesn't. And he's a human being. And that's always good to see as well. Right, lots of questions coming in. Let me just deal with a few more of those before we move on to the final phase of the show, which is basically to discuss the driver market and young drivers in particular and what they're going to do about the future. Fake Charlie Whiting wants to know, nicely worded question as ever, Fake Charlie. What do you make of the newly minted use of community service as part of the penalties for drivers? Time is of more value than relatively small fines, but do you think this should be used more or less? I think it's wonderful. I think, we should stop at putting them in striped suits and, chains and stuff. But I think that community service, as employed by the FIA, they should all do it anyway. They should all volunteer for it. But if they're not going to, I think using this as a penalty is a wonderful thing. And we all know how much Formula One needs to be publicized in the United States. So I think every driver who does anything wrong should be immediately dispatched to America, which I know it's not really a penalty. It's a lovely place to be, to promote Formula One out there and do 3 or 4 chat shows and whatever. So I think it's a great idea. Thanks for mentioning that, Fake Charlie. Alistair McDonald says, silly season. Supposed to be a statement from Mercedes today that will put the questionability, if there is such a word, I think there is, of some driver seats to rest. Still nothing as of now, 1935 BST. What's going to happen? Any ideas, inside information? Well, all I think is that if Michael was thinking about not racing in 2013, he'll be thinking more deeply about that now post-Singapore. And it all hinges around that. If Michael really wants to race again next year, I'm sure he can convince the Mercedes board and Norman Howe to give him another year. I don't there's any problem about that. And then everyone will stay where they are. But if he does retire, I think Paul di Resta will really come into the frame, as we said earlier. And by the way, the gentleman that we showed on screen walking into the track with Paul deserves some credit. That's Jerry Convey, his physical trainer, good bloke. He trains several other drivers as well, but his main man is Paul. And that was a very tough race. Fernando Alonso says in a press release, that was a really hard, stressful race. Then it was a tough race. I interviewed Paul after the race, and it was as if he was just about to get in the car. I've never seen a guy looking fitter or more relaxed. Very impressed. Anyway, I think Paul will be in strong demand at both Mercedes and at McLaren if Lewis goes to Mercedes. So I think that's what will happen there. And will Lewis go to Mercedes? It's not if Michael retires, it's not a completely stupid thing for Lewis to do, because you could argue that with the good people Mercedes do have and the budget and the facilities, he will win some races and probably some championships over, say, a 5-year stretch. The problem is he's got to take, in my view, anybody advising him would say, you've got to take that medium-term view, Lewis. Do not expect instant results. And, of course, the fur may fly if somebody doesn't say that to him, or Lewis isn't thinking that way, and he goes to Mercedes next year expecting to win Grand Prix, and he's finding it difficult to, qualify 4th or 5th or something like that, which could happen. So, whereas McLaren, he knows week in, week out, he's got a pretty good chance of going in as a race winner. My gut feeling is that he will stay at McLaren. I hope he does, actually, because I like the whole business of Lewis at McLaren. And equally, I think McLaren will be really hurt if they do lose Lewis, because they'll end up with Jenson and Paul di Resta. Not a bad combination, but it's not Lewis Hamilton, Jenson Button in terms of winning a world championship, trying to beat Fernando Alonso, Sebastian Vettel, etc., etc. So that's that one. Diego Moreno in Spain, one of our great friends who works also as a scrutineer for the FIA. He's basically asking the same thing, and he, who could replace di Resta at Force India? Well, they've got a record of running drivers with talent, and they've invested quite a lot of time and money already in Jules Bianchi. So I wouldn't be surprised to see Jules step up and take that drive. I know there are a few other guys around with budgets who could come to the team. Somebody like Jaime Alguersuari is a good example. But I think if it was between Alguersuari and maybe Bianchi, I think they would go for Bianchi. But that's only my view. Right, let's see if there's anything else here. I just wanted to say that World Series by Renault this weekend in the south of France at the Circuit Paul Ricard, wonderful place. Excuse me, I still got a bit of the flu I had in Singapore, as you can probably tell. And down there this weekend, this is going to be the biggest, best World Series by Renault weekend of all time, I think. They're going to have, apart from the regular drivers, Robin Frins, Jules Bianchi, Sam Bird, Marco Sorensen, Nick Yellerly, the really quick guys of the future. Alan Prost will be there, driving the RE40 Renault Turbo, and also I think he's going to do some laps in the 92 Williams FW14B. Jean-Eric Verne will be there, driving a Red Bull RB6. Romain Grosjean will be there, and also the ex-Ayrton Senna Lotus 98T will be there. So I'd like to be there too. Unfortunately, I can't make it for family reasons, because a certain young member of the Windsor family has got a birthday to celebrate. So I'm not going. That's how committed I am now to family life. But I'm sure a lot of fans will be watching that either on television or down in the south of France. Wonderful place to be. Okay, the driver market I think is in a state of confusion, really, because apart from the Formula One obvious drivers, there's a whole bank of really talented young guys racing in GP2 and, as I've just said, in World Series by Renault. And some of them have budgets, but they can do nothing with it. And a very good example of that is, I say nothing with it, perhaps they can, but it's a difficult thing to know how to handle the next step from GP2 to Formula One. So I've asked Luis Razzia to join us online now. Luis has been on the show before, phenomenal racing driver, really good in traffic. He's won races in GP2 this year. He's runner-up to David Valsecchi in the championship. David, another very, very good driver. Luis, are you there? And if so, welcome to the Flying Lap. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the opportunity again. Yeah, it's everything good.
Good. Well, Luis, first of all, just we're on the theme of Singapore. Tell us what it was like from the GP2 perspective at Singapore. It looks as if your paddock in that car park was pretty hot.
Very, very hot. The conditions were very similar to Malaysia when we had the first race. But Singapore, because it's a street circuit, there is less wind on the circuit, so it makes it a little bit more tough in terms of mentally and also physically. And the GP2 race was quite difficult also on the tires. The tires degrade quite a lot in that circuit, especially on the last 10 laps, which makes a very tough moment for the drivers to manage that and still push.
And Luis, what was it like for the GP2 guys in terms of the body clock, the times you kept when you went to bed, when you got up? I imagine it was different from the Formula One because your sessions were at different times and probably you didn't stay at the track quite as late. How did you handle that?
Well, it was not a big difference in terms of European times. We always had our races 4 o'clock in Europe and we had 4 o'clock there. So it was just a matter of getting used to the fuso, for the change of zones, which Asia is 7 hours ahead. So we got there a week earlier, and we got used to the time zone, and that was absolutely fine. We were waking up about 10 o'clock in the morning, and then get to the circuit about 1. And get going 4 o'clock. We had 2 races 4 o'clock and 1 qualifying 8 p.m., which was during the night, which was quite nice.
Which, as I say, is actually quite different from the way the Formula One teams had to operate, because quite often the boys working on the car didn't finish until 7:30 in the morning and then went back to the hotel and came back at about 2 in the afternoon. It was a really weird thing. And not all the drivers, I'm just throwing this in now, you don't really have to respond to this, Luis, but not all the drivers, I think, actually enjoyed that. And one driver who I think didn't have a great weekend from a driving perspective was Kamui Kobayashi, oddly, because you would imagine the late nights, the whole thing in Singapore, would be right up his street. But I got the impression from Kamui that he didn't like the late nights, he didn't like the late debriefs, he didn't really like very much about it. And it kind of showed in his performance, although Sauber in general was struggling quite a lot with grip. But back to you in GP2. Before we get on to the next phase of your career, I just want to clear one thing up. James Calado was incredibly ill on Saturday, poor guy, and had to pull out of the race in the end. And he says he ate chicken from the GP2 eating area, and probably that chicken had been left out in the sun a bit too long, and he was the victim of that one rogue piece of chicken. But I just wonder where you ate and what your feeling was about the general organization there.
Well, obviously, it's kind of it's difficult for GP to manage this kind of situations where they don't have full they don't have full engagement of the people that furniture the food. In Europe, is much more control. It is run by Christian and GP2, which those guys who works in Pirelli, which the food is great. But outside of Europe, I think they don't have a control of that. It's a shame because Calado was fighting for the 3rd position in the championship and end up 5th because of that weekend. But sometimes you get unlucky with that. I had pretty bad sickness in Barcelona on testing, and I missed 1 day testing, entire day testing. I missed the beginning of the season, can compromise a lot. I was luckier because I was testing and I was quite experienced, so it didn't matter so much for me. But obviously for Calado was very bad. But this is one of those things where drivers need to be aware what they are eating. For example, I did not eat on the Caterham. I eat on a normal like European restaurant, which I knew the food, and this is where you have to stick with it. You have to be careful. Like athletes in the Olympics, they have a way of washing their hands, and just because they are prepared to not get any kind of illness. So I was trying to be careful with that as well.
Just talking about washing our hands, and we keep diverting here, but it reminds me that there is a sort of ethos at Red Bull Racing. I think it's Red Bull Racing because it's not only Mark, but it's also Seb Vettel, I think, who thinks the same thing now. And that is that the blow dryers that are in most of the washrooms these days, in which public washrooms in which you dry your hands, actually propagate the germs rather than just dry the hands. And they're one of the worst things you can be using in a hot climate. And that's comes straight from the mouth of the two Red Bull Formula One drivers. So there you go. I don't know if it's right or not. I'm just sort of saying that in general.
Exactly. We use a lot when we travel. I use a lot the alcohol, that people use to kill. And I think that it's quite useful because we shake our hands a lot on the tracks. We met a lot of people. We shake our hands and we end up putting our hands, a little bit of on eye or maybe on the mouth. And that can be crucial for the season.
That's a good point. I saw Lewis Hamilton. I was watching Lewis Hamilton at one point at the Singapore weekend. It was between sessions, and he was walking from the garage to the hospitality area, and a whole bunch of people sort of gathered around him. He was being very good and signing autographs. And suddenly a guy came up, and I have to say, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but everybody was. He was very sweaty, and put his arm around Lewis, who was also quite hot himself. And Lewis just sort of cringed and flung and ran away from him and sort of flung his arm off his back. And I think the guy would have left thinking, Lewis Hamilton, really rude. But to be honest with you, I'm not surprised by that. And I think I probably would have reacted the same way. For when you're trying to be an athlete, or you are an athlete, and you're trying to be as fit as possible, that's the last thing you need in the middle of a weekend.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird situation for the fans. I don't know much about those situations, but definitely you should be careful with a lot of things. It's very important this season. If you miss a race, can struggle for the rest of the season. So it's a real athlete lifestyle. So you need to take serious.
Well, Lewis, let's get back to you now. You drove the Force India at Manicourt. We've just heard Atnar Safnar saying how impressed the team were with you. First of all, let's have a few words from you about that test, what you thought of the car, and then your plans. I don't know if you're driving in the next test we're likely to have in Abu Dhabi as well.
Yes, the test with Force India was very, very good. We had only one day, but I think that day we got the maximum out of the car. The engineers were quite pleased with the feedback and also the changes we made in the car, and was a good direction for myself. Obviously, we had only 2 sets of tires, which is quite tricky for a driver coming to F1. We have only 2 sets in an entire day, and you have to take the most out of it. And I think when we did our long runs and we did our performance run, I could take from the opportunity that I had the maximum what I had in hands. So this is where they're looking for new drivers, new coming drivers. And I think that's why they were very pleased. Again, we are testing again in Abu Dhabi. Hopefully we are doing 2 days there. And it'll be very good to get again, going on F1 car, which is always good for us. The young drivers need to get a lot of mileage on the cars, and that will be very good for me, and more set of tires, getting more used to the KER systems, which is quite complicated. People think it's just a boost, but you have to manage the battery and manage the energy through the lap, and it's not an easy system to work. But once you get used to, and it needs time on the car.
And how do you see 2013 panning out for you now, Lewis? And you've got as good as CV as you could have at the level that you've reached in motorsport. You've proved that you can pass, you're aggressive, but at the same time you can finish races. And don't take this the wrong way, but I believe also you have the support of some good sponsors in Brazil. What's the next step? How do you now progress to putting an F1 deal together?
Well, it's a point where it's very difficult nowadays, because it's very interesting, because even though drivers are doing very well in GP2, there is no much interest from the teams that they want to have us close to them. The teams nowadays, they really expect the driver go there, knock their door, and really we are asking for them a favor. And that's a very awkward situation. But because I have been in some teams in F1, and also I got a good connection with Christian Horner and other guys in the top teams, that can open my doors and can give me a better opportunity probably than other drivers in GP2. But it's very difficult nowadays to a driver, even though with results and a good experience and also with a budget, to get in F1, because there are a lot of young drivers that are already there, they already make it, and also not so many drivers going out, and there are only 24 seats. From my point of view, I'm definitely going to push to be in the grid next season, but it's not easy for any driver nowadays. Even though if you are on a seat this season, it's likely you cannot have anyone for next season. So it's a tough situation for everybody, but I have a lot of faith and a lot of passion, and like you said, I probably have a good sponsors from Brazil, and I hope I can put all together, which is not easy. Again, you have to work a lot and push people to make the deal, and then 2013 will be good.
Well, my view is that more and more drivers are having to go out and find money, and the Formula One teams more and more are looking to drivers to knock on their doors, as you say, to bring them sponsorship. Very few teams out there seem to be generating sponsorship generically in their own right. I'm excluding the top 3 teams for obvious reasons, but I'm talking about the rest of the teams. And if the teams, therefore, are looking more and more to the drivers, they need to do more to reach out, I think, to the GP2 drivers, to the World Series drivers, and give them an opportunity at least to go out there and have some sort of link with them. And I've said this for many, many years, and I'll say it again now, that I think that motor racing is very different from all other sports, where you can have a large athletic management agency like IMG in tennis or golf or whatever it is, basically managing the careers of talented athletes. In motor racing, that doesn't work. Managers have almost to be exclusive to the drivers, and even then, finding money is incredibly difficult. The power base actually is with the teams, and it's the teams that in themselves should be becoming management agencies. And every F1 team, I think, should have 4 or 5, 6 or 7 young drivers under contract that they're helping and supporting. And the drivers can go out there. They can pick up the phone better than most people and speak to CEOs. But in order to do that, they've got to have some sort of link, some sort of bedrock on which to speak. And the teams need to be doing more, I believe, to give drivers that sort of bedrock. But Lewis, you're doing a very good job on your own behalf, and very best wishes to you for the upcoming winter, the upcoming tests, and indeed for 2013. I really do hope we see you in Formula One next year. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Like you said, I would like to see more action from the F1 teams also. They could give much more support to the young drivers that come in, and it's even a very funny situation, but even though drivers in GP2, they're winning races and doing a very good job, if anyone called them and say, come to the F1 paddock, let's have a talk, we don't have even a pass to go there, which is unbelievable. But we are doing our best, and we hope we'll be on a grid in 2013.
It's ever a pleasure to talk to you, Lewis. Very best of luck with everything.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Some very good questions coming in. We're not going to be able to get through all of them, but Moran in Croatia says, I'd like to know more about the FOM camera team and I just can't find anything about them. They experiment with new small cameras this weekend, most notably with Fernando's car. We who sit in front of our TV screens find new angles, new angles, I think you meant to say, but there's some angels out there too. Very appreciative, immersive, and fresh. Very good English. So, Peter, what do you know about that group? How many people are there? Who's testing the new cameras? Well, they certainly had helmet cams on Lewis and Jensen at one point on Friday, which is good to see. They've been working on helmet cams for quite a while now. The difficulty is in integrating them with the solidarity of the helmet and the license of the helmet and the shape of the helmet. So that was a step in the right direction. For me, there's still too much vibration and it's still quite difficult to watch it. But when you're thinking that is what the driver's kind of seeing, it works well. In general, the quality of the guys at FOM is extremely high, very hardworking, very professional people, pleasure to work with. I've been lucky enough to work with FOM TV for many years. The onboard camera division is very separate from the at-track camera division, and there's a kind of in fact, I was talking to one of the cameramen in Singapore, and he said, you wouldn't believe how big the onboard garage is here relative to where it was a few years ago. And of course, they've squeezed out some of the regular RF camera guys. So that was interesting to see that development. But yeah, just a great bunch of people. I love hanging out with them, really. Most of them hang as a group, but I've developed some very good friends with FOM cameramen over the years, and God bless them all. Good people. But thanks for asking the question, Miranda. And for that, I'd like to give you the Globe Award, actually, because it's a different question to those of most people. You're not asking the usual thing about Lewis or who's doing what. And I think it's given me an opportunity to talk about some of my mates, so that's very important. So please send us your shoe size and address to prizes@smibs.tv. Hopefully there'll be no glitch this time. What else? Diane Cullimore says, first of all, happy birthday to Jack Lewis. Well, thank you very much, Diane. That's very kind. Going off to see him in just a minute. We're all going out to dinner. What are your views of Michael's accident at Singapore? Do you think he should have come back at all? Well, that's a good question. I think he retired when he didn't want to retire. I think that was the initial problem with Michael, and he didn't have a very comfortable or happy retirement from what I could see. So my point is, I don't think he should ever have retired. And if he hadn't retired, I think he probably would have retired by now. And so we're seeing the wrong Michael. Everything's out of sync. And it all started with the signing of Kimi too soon, really, and Massa driving as well as he was at that point. And Michael kind of, as far as I understand it, thinking, well, I might as well stop in that case. And that was a shame, because Michael could have done another couple of years at Ferrari and then retired on his own terms. And he probably would have won the World Championship in 2007, who knows. But I think that's where it went wrong. And I think if you retire for the wrong reasons, if you do come back, it's for sure the wrong reason as well. JP in Calgary, Canada, says some very nice things. Too nice to say here. But he's saying, you predicted Fernando to be the 2012 World Champion. How comfortable do you feel about your prediction now that Vettel is getting closer? Well, I still think Lewis Hamilton is the driver that's going to push Fernando closest to the title, and the gap actually took a big jump in Singapore. So if I was Fernando Alonso right now, I'd be feeling that was a massive bonus, and he's very lucky, and he's absolutely correct to be out there saying, as he is, we can't rely on other people dropping out, we've got to have a faster car. That's an obvious statement. So I think Fernando will win it, but it'll be incredibly tight, and it'll probably come down to the last race. Have we got any more time, Christy? We should be winded up there now. No, well, we're 10 minutes over. I think we better wind up now in terms of the link that we want to put out for the file we want to put out for the finished product, which we will put out in link form to YouTube and iTunes download as soon as we can possibly do it. So a big thank you to my guests tonight, to Otmar Safnauer, the CEO of Sahara Force India, to Remy Taffin from Renault, the head of race operations for Renault, and to Louis Razzia, the vice chairman, vice president, vice champion of GP2 this year. Very good job he did. And a big thank you to you too, the fans out there, for your support of the Flying Lap. Like us on Facebook, rate us on iTunes, and follow us on Twitter. And we'll be back again next week with the preview to the Japanese Grand Prix. A big thank you to our technical partners, to ThinkTel, to Webcore Labs, and to Globe. We'll see you next week. Thanks for watching, and God bless.